Trial of Michael Dunn, the 47-year-old Florida man who shot and killed 17-year-old Jordan Davis, is over. Dunn has been found guilty of first-degree murder. Now, back in 2012, Dunn had claimed self-defense after shooting Davis because his music was too loud, and he had asked him to turn it down. Now, Dunn alleges that Davis pointed a shotgun at him, and that Dunn just had to defend himself against the loud music shotgun-wielding 17-year-old. Now, of course, the police had found that there was no gun in Davis's car, in his SUV, and that Dunn had shot at the vehicle about 10 times, even as they were fleeing. 3 of them, of course, hitting and killing Jordan Davis. And this was during the trial. Dunn had told the jury, "I meant to pull it 50 times if that's what it took to save my life. But your life wasn't in danger, but you still would have shot 50 times. Interesting. And that's because, of course, rap music is so incredibly dangerous, guys, right? Now, what's interesting about this whole case is that it was found guilty of first-degree murder. Now, the jury was actually hung on that charge because first degree equals premeditation. And the evidence had to be incredibly damning for a jury to actually adopt that first-degree murder charge. Now, as far as this whole thing, I'm happy to see some justice here, and I really do hope that discourages people in Florida and other states, especially ones that are, have self-defense laws and stand your ground, which wasn't involved in this case, Jordan. Just letting you know, it wasn't involved here. But I think it will make some people who thought about using self-defense cases from being so trigger-happy and maybe thinking about it before they decide to haul off and murder someone over loud music.
This is good. Like, justice was done here. That's good. And I don't know that there's really a whole lot to talk about here, but I do want to point out what to me seems like a really important difference in this particular case and other high-profile shooting, of unarmed black men, whether that was Trayvon Martin or Michael Brown, whatever you want to name it. And the thing here is that, like, we didn't shift the narrative to nonsense. As good as it is to make these things high-profile and to unfortunately, you have to pick out anecdotes of young black men getting killed to point out, that this is a problem in America. Across the board. I don't remember, maybe it's just because I didn't follow this case closely, so if I'm wrong here, whatever, but like, with Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown, like, half the time spent on the news coverage talked about the circumstances of the shooting, and then the other half of the time, if you're on MSNBC, it was talking about what a good kid Michael Brown was. If you're on Fox, it was talking about what a bad kid he was. And the same thing with Trayvon Martin. This case, like, they talked about the shooting. Like, we didn't get sucked into that completely pointless narrative, which just seems like a bait and switch from the right to me, because if you talk about the shooting and you make the issue about the actual issue, I think all 3 of those cases seem, truth be told, we don't know enough about the Michael Brown, but the Trayvon Martin and this one seem clearly like justice was not done in the case of Trayvon Martin, and justice was done here because of the outcomes. And I don't get, like, why we as liberals feel like we have to do that. Like, we have to make the victims out to be angelic people. Like, you can be an innocent gun victim, and it doesn't matter, if you flipped off a camera or if you have a bit of a rough past or whatever, all these complete, ad hominem attacks that come out. Like, I don't know why we feel we're so easy to get sucked into that, and we didn't do that here. And I don't want to say, like, I'm not trying to attribute and say that's the only reason that justice was done here when it doesn't seem like it wasn't in other places. But I think it's an important detail to not ignore. Like, talk about what actually matters and, like, what's important. And don't worry about the kid's past or whatever. Talk about what happened that day. And if there was injustice done there, then talk about the injustice that was done. And don't open up unnecessary doors to shift the conversation to anything that could poison public opinion, because what the kid did in the past or didn't do in the past doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if he's the best kid in the world or the worst kid in the world. He's an unarmed kid who didn't pose any threat that got shot. That's what you talk about. And I think that's what was done here.
I don't share Jordan's silver lining only because if this was a television show, David Caruso would have thrown his sunglasses on and the Who would have strummed a guitar in the first 5 minutes of the show. Case dismissed. We're in a commercial. David better find another case to go to because this isn't interesting. And that's, I think, where I don't find too much, solace in that America didn't turn this into another Trayvon Martin. This is impossible to turn it. This is such an open and shut case. Like, this is so unbelievably, like, there's just nothing in this case that you could mildly find to stand up for the guy. Like, there's just nothing. Whether he didn't call 911, like the forensic expert came in and said that the kid was in the, like, trying to get away from the bullets, etc. down the line. Like, this was just such an open and shut case that it would, honestly, there would be not enough tears in the world that I would be able to find if anyone tried to make this a news, sort of pinata, because there's no other side. And so with Trayvon, with everything else, there were, like, pieces and problems and, like, nobody knows what happened kind of thing. And this was just insanity. Somebody's music's playing too loud, bang, 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 bang. And, not to, like, pivot to a completely other argument that I'm sure this panel could go on all night, but I will say, every time eventually somebody uses the strawman argument of, well, people get killed with knives too, here's an example of where somebody wouldn't have died if it was a knife. These are the kinds of things that happen. People go off kilter, go crazy, and the only weapon that gets you dead from 0 to 60 in a stupid situation like this would be a gun.
Well, and not only am I not going to argue with Dan, but I'm going to completely agree with him, which I'm sure shocks him. But I'm also I want to point out something that is relevant to the story here, like this specific case. These are the Michael Dunn's words. Let me see if I can read it here. Now, I'm quoting from a source I don't particularly care for, so if this is misquoted, I apologize. I meant to pull it 50 times if that's what it took to save my life, he told the Florida jury on Tuesday. I deliberately defended myself. There was nothing accidental about it. And the reason he pulled a gun on this kid is because apparently these black youths moved too quickly and frightened him, and he felt his person was in danger, so he shot them. Like, that's a serious problem. Like, that's indicative of a race problem in America. Like, black kids can't move too fast because if they move fast, they must be carrying guns. Like, if you went to these kids with a preconceived notion, they were listening to gangster rap, therefore that was bad. Like, if these had been white kids busting George Jones just as loud, you probably wouldn't have done this. And you also, even if you did, maybe you genuinely don't want loud music, you wouldn't have gone with your hand ready to go to your carry weapon. But so there's that. But this is also indicative of a big problem in American gun culture, and it's like, it's in American culture in general, but it gets exercised in gun culture because we got the tools to do it. But Jim Jeffries, great stand-up comedian, has a bit. I completely disagree with him on his conclusion, but he has this awesome Second Amendment bit where he points out, like, because he's had his apartment broken into, he was tied up, and they were robbed and stuff like that, and people in America immediately go, see, if you had a gun, you could have stopped it. And he says, most people that break into your apartment, they just want your TV. And you say that to a lot of Americans, and they look at you dumbfounded because they don't get what point you're trying to make. Because to a lot of Americans, somebody breaking in to take your TV is a killable offense. Under the guise of, I don't know what kind of threat you're going to pose to me. Well, maybe wait till they pose a threat, and if they genuinely pose a threat to you, then you've got a right in America to kill them. But that's not where it's at. Now it's you're guilty until proven innocent, and you're guilty of murder until proven innocent. Like, as soon as you see someone that you maybe kind of don't like, they're immediately trying to murder you, and it's okay to kill them. And that's really what Stand Your Ground is about. It's about not having a duty to flee before resulting to lethal force. And it's not only is it damning that we see that in our culture, but now you see cops doing it. That's what happened with Michael Brown, this big, scary kid. I'll concede, might have been a big, scary kid, was 20 feet away or whatever, 30 feet away from a police officer. The police officer shot him, and people defend the police officer by saying he could have felt like his life was threatened from 30 feet away because the kid was big. Like, no, if the kid poses a serious threat, he doesn't have to be armed. If he's up on the officer beating him, hey, I'm not going to like it, but I'm going to listen to the argument. That's just something we've got going on that's got to change.
On top of that, which I think is really interesting in the States, is, and not to paint everybody with the same brush, but sort of the, white conservative male, or like the hive mind of cable news, where we have these discussions about, does someone deserve to get shot at X amount of times, like those insane conversations. But what I find really interesting is, in this case, why doesn't he go and call the cops? So I'm Canadian, and we always think that, speaking in generalities, a lot of the world looks at America and goes, it's really bizarre. Your first thought is to John Wayne it. Like, your first thought is, there's a criminal in the front yard. I got to take care of this. We're all, like, on the phone immediately dialing up, 911. And that, this same thing, call the cops come over, why are you playing loud rap music? Make sure you're safe in your own home, and you're good to go. This guy runs out. Now, why does he do that? Well, a lot of the times, it goes back to this idea of, safety first, in terms of, I'm going to do it myself, which is really bizarre. And what I think is really funny is the same conservative media, or the same kind of like extreme media, we'll say, that makes arguments for folks like this, are on the flip side of the argument when it comes to Michael Brown. So on one hand, it's, well, you got to go out and meet the guy because you can't call the cops. And on the other hand, it's, well, you can't trust, you got to trust the cops. Why would this kid, look, it's a cop. Why are we even asking questions? A cop did it. Cops are so great. So they have this like double narrative all the time in these situations. On one hand, why don't you call the cops if they're so amazing? The cops that killed Michael Brown are amazing cops. Why shouldn't we just believe everything they say? And on the flip side here, you can't call the cops. He had to do it himself. So this is what I always think is really interesting, is trying to have it both ways all the time. The cops are so trustworthy and amazing, we can't have any problems with militarization of police. But then this guy's going out to shoot somebody. Why didn't he just call that same amazing police force that would take care of it? And all of these problems in America with militarization of police, which is creeping up to my country, and these situations cause these problems to just degenerate even further, because it creates a more paranoid society. It creates a society that feels they have to act. They can't trust the police. And so all of these things just feed back into each other into a terrible cycle of bad events like this one that could easily be prevented.